So, are we out of popsicles?
The sun is a little hot today, isn't it?
Yeah,
Do you check the other freezer?
I'll go check in the big freezer in the back. Did we have a guest planned for today?
You go ahead, find those popsicles. I'll look for someone to bring in.
Alrighty.
Alright, so already seems interesting. Here we go. Hello there.
Well, this is interesting.
Hmm.
I'd be lying if I said it was the weirdest thing that's happened to me in the past few days.
I found some popsicles.
And I found a guest.
Oh, hello.
So this isn't the most interesting thing that's happened to you today?
No, not by a long shot.
It's honestly a new reaction.
Would you like a popsicle and tell us a bit about what's been happening?
No on the popsicle. I'll take tea if you have it.
Sure. I'm Ephraim, by the way.
And I am Ashura.
Call me Marcus. Marcus von Wilhorn.
Marcus von Wilhorn. A pleasure to meet you.
Why am I here and not dreaming?
Well, technically you are.
Oh, I suppose that makes sense.
We are the Delegation of Dreamers. We bring people in through their dreams, yet a lot of people find their way here somehow. How just to speak with them and collect their stories.
I suppose you're here to collect my stories then.
If you'd be willing to share, of course.
I must warn you, it's quite the doozy.
Oh, really now? We've heard plenty.
Well, where would you like me to begin?
You sure you don't want a popsicle? It's gelatinous cube flavored.
I've seen enough gelatinous cubes for a lifetime. Thank you.
So, Marcus, can you tell us where your story begins?
My story begins in a large settlement known as Harrenhal. It's my childhood home, and someday, I suppose, maybe sooner than I hope, I'm destined to rule. It's a center of art, architecture, and, well, worship of Tobarok. As much as that's still a thing now.
Who's Tobarok?
Tobarok is a platinum dragon, the god of creation and the arts. My father was fond of him, and so am I.
You're not a bard, are you just artistic?
I am a paladin, actually.
Sure, you can't just go around asking people if they're artistic. They should be able to share that on their own terms.
I suppose I have some artistic bent to me, but I'm no bard. I don't have the range.
My apologies. So, if you're a paladin, how come you're so fond of God of the arts and creativity?
Not just creativity, creation. Protecting creation is just as important as creating.
Protecting creation.
Paladins of Tobruk abhor anything that would stifle creation. They fight for the liberation of others and the protection of the rights of others. My father was one of the greatest paladins of Tobruk to ever live, and I followed in his footsteps, which is, I suppose, why I ran away from home and got in as much trouble as I did.
You ran away.
I was locked up in a godforsaken tower for 20 years. Well, people debated to see if my father would return.
Did they nickname you Rapunzel?
No.
Never mind. Fourth wall.
Okay. I get the concept. I don't know how that applies. Anyhow, my father disappeared when I was very young. I never believed that he was dead, even though others were convinced otherwise. With my father's hand onto the throne, I was not immediately next up to rule. Obviously, if he stepped down, I would be in charge, but most believed I was too young. So that's why I was basically confined for 20 years. Eventually, though, I grew sick of it, and I left. I got into contact with some friends in town, and leapt out the window into a bale of hay and made a run for it.
I wonder who keeps placing all those conveniently placed bales of hay.
It is a true mystery. Maybe a secret order of some kind.
I should also mention I had quote-unquote stolen some money from the coffers. It is mine, anyways. And ran off to the nearest town to recruit some adventurers, despite my mother's pleading that I stay.
So, what were you and the adventurers set out to do?
Well, initially, the goal was to make some money, get some renown under our belts, make a name for myself, like my father did, and hopefully find some leads. We spoke to an archdruid for our first job to venture off into the Varenhof Plains and investigate some strange magical disturbances and see if anybody was still alive out there.
Where did you come across the druid?
We found them in the town of Arnberg, which is one of the larger settlements in the area.
And did he have a job posting out, or?
Yes, essentially. The job was rather simple. He would pay us a small amount of gold for any information that we could find about the towns in the area. Given that the magical storms had disrupted communications, so people couldn't exactly know what was going on.
I see.
And you set out to investigate these magical storms?
Yes, we set out to investigate the storms, rescue any survivors we found on the roads, and, if we were lucky, find some intact towns and maybe some evidence as to where my father had gone. These magical storms were very interesting, but we didn't run into them immediately. First of all, we ran into a guard from one of the nearby towns who was fleeing the area. These magical storms had started relatively recently, so it was not unexpected to see some people still on the road. This guard told us that the town of Königschloss was basically lost to a bunch of undead.
That's a hell of a name.
Königschloss, it's one of the more pronounceable names. We've also can hit you with Verkerschloss, Heuston, my personal favorite, Carrick Drakenfist, which is a famous dwarven hold, famous because the dwarven king there punched a dragon to death.
I mean, that's a little rude.
It happens. It wasn't. It's a long story. It's a very long story.
Sounds like it.
Actually, punching a dragon to death is underselling it. He punched it once.
Still pretty rude.
Anyhow, no offense. I'm sorry.
All right.
I mean, if a dragon fell to one punch, I don't think it was an actual, good dragon.
After running into this man, we continued to travel south and ran into these first of these magical storms. And let me tell you, I have encountered few things more terrifying in my life. You ever had a bad hangover?
Yeah?
All too often after a tavern event.
Imagine every time you cast any sort of magic, you get a bad hangover, and then something terrible happens. Or it doesn't work at all. Or you get the opposite of the desired effect. Wild magic is very scary.
I 100% agree.
We were essentially nullified for several hours. We hunkered down and didn't do anything for the rest of the day. It was entirely understandable why people were fleeing in the face of this.
Yeah. So, what was it that caused them?
It wasn't entirely clear. That's the strangest part about it. It seemed to be almost like a freak occurrence.
Okay. Did you get paid for finding that out? it seems like a bit of anticlimactic if you're about to find out what's going on and it's just a freak occurrence.
Well, finding out that Königschloss had been destroyed, we used our Ascending Stone to communicate with the Archdruid, and he sent us a small amount of gold, which we used to resupply at the dwarven town of Wexlarni before continuing our travels.
Okay, well, that's nice of him.
This Archdruid was exceptionally helpful. We found a strange tower. I suspect, personally, that this might have been the cause of the disturbance, but only one of our party was allowed inside, and she never spoke anything of what she saw in there. It was powered by some automatons, I don't know how to describe it to you. It's not my area of expertise. Living machines?
Hmm.
In either case, the door only opened for her, and when she came out, she didn't tell anyone what she saw.
Must have been a lot of gold in there.
You would think, but she didn't exit any richer.
No, of course not. She'd save it for when you're not around. She'd come back to that tower.
I mean, I know you would.
Uh-huh.
Yasha was always a little driven by gold more than anything, let's say. Useful for me, but lacking conviction otherwise. Not to besmirch her name too much, she proved to be reliable. In either case, by the time we exited the tower, things get exponentially worse, and this is why I say this isn't even the weirdest thing that's happened to me in the past week.
Go on.
So, the most evil dragon I've ever seen in my life, no offense, you've seen illustrations of evil, black and red and radiating darkness, appeared in the sky out of nowhere. It essentially tore open a hole in the sky while we were standing out debating our next moves. It began to rain down absolute destruction upon the lands. That is, until my god, Tobarok, appeared.
Oh, and saved you all.
You would think we were not so lucky. Tobarok went to bat for, creation, and a massive fight ensued. I wish I could describe it in greater detail, but your imagination could do a better job than my words can. But the fight culminates in my god, Tobarok, being gravely wounded, smashed into the ground, and then dragged off into the sky. At the same time, the sun unfurls to reveal that it is also a dragon.
The sun?
Why is everything dragons?
I mean, we are everywhere.
I mean, sure, but the sun? The sun unfurls itself to reveal it is a brilliant, radiant dragon, and it takes both of them and drags them off into that same tear in reality through which it had entered, and leaves, plunging the entire world in the darkness, and leaving me with only the faintest hint of my deity remaining. I should tell you that my morale was low that day.
Huh. So what was worse? Losing your son or losing your deity?
I don't think you can compare them meaningfully. As a paladin, to lose one's deity is like losing the sun. I could still feel him. I could still draw power from my belief, but it was distant, weak. It was terrible. And then, the sun was out, and so things got pitch black and cold, and, my vision isn't the greatest. Things got a little interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine it. Kind of weird, everything just turning dark all of a sudden.
Well, with no sun in the sky, it was, kind of the logical conclusion of that. But luckily, we still had that sending stone to that archdruid. We sent a message to the archdruid asking if they had also seen this, whereupon the archdruid immediately created a portal for us to return to her.
We could have done that all that time.
Well, it wasn't really necessary up to that point. The problem being that us interacting with the tower and the calamity of, everything that had just occurred had roused lots of undead beasts in the area. So me and my compatriots had to fight our way into the portal, and a brutal battle ensued. Luckily, we're all well versed in combat at that point. We managed to get through the portal, which takes us to the city of Richtenau.
Richtwen?
They're ricking now.
Richtenau was already a major settlement before this happened. By the time we gotten a hold of the Archdruid and had been successfully returned to Richtenau, most of the region's leadership was converging to try and formulate some semblance of a plan. There were two proposals, one of which was a long shot and the other was an even longer shot. The long shot plan was essentially to hide in the dwarven holds and hope everything blows over. Yeah, that's not going to work, I didn't think.
Oh,
Probably not in the best of ways.
My proposal and the longer shot plan was to use a world anchor to restore the sun. The problem being, my father, Ulrich von Wilhorn, was the only man who knew where it was. And he'd been missing for 20 years.
And what is a world anchor?
When the world was created by dragons, they used world anchors, which are essentially elemental portals to the elemental planes, to basically create it and stabilize it. The world anchor to the element of fire creates the heat that our reality requires. The last time this was messed with, it made an entire continent-sized desert.
Oh,
It was surmised that we could probably create at least a sun substitute with it, if necessary.
okay.
That would require finding my father, which of course had been my plan all along, but this expedited things significantly so.
Why was your father important in this?
My father was the last person to handle the world anchor.
Oh, okay.
what? How did your father get a hold of a world anchor?
That is an even longer story for another time. But his adventuring party and his day was planning to use it to defeat a lich and seal off a portal to the ice plane that was causing the world to freeze over. That's why he had it originally.
I see.
The only lead we had on where my father had originally been was in the undead necropolis in the ruins of Sayril, which had been destroyed some 20 to 30 years prior, by the undead. Plans were formed with every major power in the area. There were too many undead for us to just walk in there, so to speak. So most of the armies of the living, at least those who could get there in time, mustered their strength and began an assault on Sayril, the undead necropolis. In the meantime, my party and I snuck into the back, essentially. We managed to avoid most patrols in the region while they were preoccupied with the large army forming on their border, but we did have to, dispatch with several of them. Eventually, we managed to find our way inside of Sayril and find a temple which has living people in it. Now, you might be asking yourself, why are there living people inside of an undead necropolis? It turns out that it wasn't entirely undead in there. There was a wannabe developing soon-to-be lich by the name of Alistair Grimsby, who had taken up residence there when it was destroyed all those years ago, and was controlling the armies of the undead. We managed to get an audience with him through some persuasive methods at the tip of a sword.
Those persuasive methods include knocking heads.
Well, you can't get things done in this world without a little bit of force applied in the correct way. We managed to get an audience with him regardless, and with some convincing, because he was adamant that he would somehow totally be fine despite the planet about to freeze over, we managed to convince him to help us. Whereupon he revealed that he had had Ulrich for these past 20 years as essentially a trophy, a petrified statue.
Ah, okay.
Ulrich and Grimsby used to travel together.
Oh.
That is another long story.
You have many long stories.
So your father and this necromancer had history.
Yes, they used to be allies, in fact. Grimsby did not initially reveal his flexible morality, let's say. Not until it was too late to stop him, anyways. He disappeared in the final hours of my father's campaign.
Sorry.
Badumtis. Pun not intended. Regardless, I had finally done what I'd set out to do. I'd found my father, and yet there wasn't really time to reconcile with him. Once again, I find myself in this strange place of my childhood where this man I looked up to and idolized hardly has time for me. He reveals to us that he had hidden away the world anchor in a temple far to the south, where it was kept safe by a priestess. So we contacted the forces that had gathered outside of the undead necropolis, secured ourselves an airship, and traveled to the south under the rising, well, what would have been the rising sun, I suppose, if there was a sun.
They call the horizons.
The Rising Dragon.
Sorry, ADHD is acting up.
That's a mood. On the way, me and my father caught up a little bit. I tried to condense 20 years of history down into just a few hours. I don't know how much I succeeded. We talked about things. I didn't know it at the time, but this would probably be the only time I really would have to have a real heart-to-heart with my dad.
Did he act weird after being frozen for 20 years and then just woken up to the sun was missing?
Honestly, he seemed to take it in stride. My father was getting up there in years. I think he'd seen pretty much everything there was to see at that point.
And how did you convince the Lich to let him go?
It took some persuasion, but essentially we had to argue that we would leave him alone, for the moment at least, if he freed our father, and that it was in his interest that the world not end. Strange that you would have to convince someone of that, but, liches do lich things.
Lich is gonna lich.
Eventually, we did arrive at this temple and set down the airship there. I won't lie to you, I was fully prepared to deliver the payload myself, if need be.
But that would kill you.
That would kill me.
I'm assuming you did not, since we pulled you through your dreams, after all.
Unless this is the afterlife, then no, I'm not dead. We were informed when we traveled downwards into the temple by the priestess that Ulrich was the only one who was going to be able to carry it. You can't just set it down. It would set things on fire. And Ulrich has been the only one previously who had been able to hold on to it without immediately succumbing to the immense power. Most people burst into flames when they touch it, for the record.
Do you know why was he so immune to it?
It's unclear. He had been able to handle it previously. He ascribed it to his beliefs being strong enough. Getting some measure of support from Tobarak to be able to hold on to it, being just a little bit more than a mortal man.
Tobrok, the dragon that dragged you into the rift.
Tobarak the injured dragon.
The injured dragon.
I mean, I'd gone through all the trouble to find my father, only to be told that he was about to be ripped away from me again, this time permanently.
Well, that's a shame.
That's a difficult thing to process.
I don't think I'm fully done processing it.
I'm sorry.
It's alright. It was his decision, anyhow. He took it with pride. Before he took the world anchor, though, he did give me his weapon, a halberd, which he had carried since he was first exiled from his own home, all the way until now. His halberd had written on it, "A light in the darkness."
It seems he held true to those words until the very end.
With this heirloom, I watched as my father boarded an airship with just a few volunteer crew and took off into the horizon, traveling far into the distance and the sky until only a pinprick of his ship was visible, and then I saw the flash, and there was a new sun in the sky. And now I'm traveling home with just my few companions, this halberd, and whatever memories I still have.
Well,
At least you have another family now.
One of them asked if I was going to retire after this. I don't think so. I'm too restless. I enjoy the adventuring life. I have very little desire to rule, more to lead. There is a difference.
I'm glad that you got to speak to your father one last time.
Me as well. I don't think I said enough, but we shouldn't hold on to regrets.
Yeah.
You should learn from them.
I was lucky enough to have a second chance to speak to my family. Some people don't get that luxury.
Like I said, it seems like you're traveling home with another family now.
My adventuring family. My found family.
Your bot family. I mean, you pay them as adventurers, right?
Did you end up paying them?
I have not paid them yet.
Ah, then it's your new family.
We'll just keep that between us.
Listen, my pockets are very deep. I'll just have to go home and explain to everyone why I went completely missing and then the sun went out, and why everything has completely gone to hell, and why Ulrich will never be coming back. And then I'm sure they'll give me whatever money's in the treasury to pay these adventurers.
Just kind of brush the payment under the rug.
100%. I am certain. I have done nothing to justify this belief. I am operating on hope and prayer, like any good paladin.
And if you still pray to the god of the sun, I think you might be praying to your own father. So in some way you still have communication with them.
Perhaps.
Is that a good place to end, do we think?
You made it sound like he's about to die. Like
What?
You'll meet your father.
No, I said pray to the sun god.
Oh, okay. I mean, is that really a good thing though? Because the sun kicked his god out of the sky, or what?
Okay. The sun. Sorry, that's not entirely clear.
I'm sorry. The god and the sun fought.
The Godfall was like a 20-minute monologue from the DM. It is a pain in the ass to describe. But an evil dragon who was the essence of destruction tore its way out of its prison, mortally wounded Tobrok, and then had to get bodied by the dragon that was the sun before they all fucked off.
Yeah, and you prayed to the sun, correct?
No.
Prayed to Tobrok, the platinum dragon of creation.
Okay. Sorry, I mixed that up.
No, fuck the sun. The sun can go fuck itself.
That's his father now.
Yeah, I mean, but the old sun.
The old sun is kind of a dick in lore. However,
yeah.
Marcus doesn't know that.
All right.
Nobody knows that.
All right, but you're now the son of the sun.
100%. Probably. Maybe.
Okay.
It's not clear.
It's not clear.
My DM takes the Dark Souls approach to world building, which is that there is lore. He will not tell you.
You just gotta find it.
It's in a 20-page text document somewhere on Google Drive.
Listen, if the players don't ask, they don't get to know.
That is literally the approach.
I know the feeling.
I think he's going to kill me if I make him add more lore to Harrenhal and Tobrok. That document is already stupid long.
Speaking of being stupid long, Ashura, will you round this interview off?
So I think it's about time we get you back to your found family, whether they've been paid or not.
I will pay them. I'm good on my debts. I promise.
But either way, I think it's about time that we send you back.
Sounds good.
This was an interesting discussion. I suppose lecture, if anything.
Story time. But we thank you for the many quite interesting stories you shared. Until we see you again, have a good awakening.